When a baby looks out at the world, the brain runs a simple algorithm to decide what deserves attention. The rule is novelty. The baby looks at the new thing. The baby looks at the unexpected thing. Decades of looking time research in developmental psychology have relied on this fundamental principle of infant cognition. Show a baby a block falling down, the baby looks for 2 seconds. Show a baby a block floating in midair, a violation of physical expectation, the baby looks for 10 seconds. The rule is absolute. Novelty wins. Until researchers put the novelty bias up against something else. They showed infants 2 scenes. In the first scene, an experimenter distributed crackers unequally between 2 individuals. One got 3, the other got 1. Highly novel, highly surprising because it violated expectation. In the second scene, the experimenter distributed the crackers equally, 2 and 2. Boring, expected, not novel at all. Under the absolute rules of infant attention, the baby should have stared at the unequal distribution because it was surprising. The baby did not. The baby stared at the fair distribution. And in that moment, the entire framework of moral development shifted. Something about fairness was powerful enough to override the single strongest attentional instinct the infant brain possesses. To understand why this finding sent a shockwave through developmental neuroscience, you have to understand the sheer cognitive dominance of the novelty bias. The infant brain is an uncompromising learning machine, and novelty is its fuel. The visual processing stream is literally wired to orient towards stimuli that do not match the brain's existing predictive models. It is the engine of all early cognitive development. Look at what you do not understand, process it until it becomes familiar, look away, find something new. It is deeply conserved across species and evolutionarily non-negotiable. For a stimulus to override this system, for an infant to choose to look at the boring, expected, equal outcome instead of the surprising, novel, unequal outcome, requires an evaluative signal of extraordinary strength. The fairness preference did not just compete with the novelty bias, it defeated it. This is not a slight tendency. This is the infant's moral evaluation system, pulling rank on its primary learning algorithm. The baby's brain receives the visual data. All computes that the unequal distribution is more interesting, but simultaneously computes that the equal distribution is fair and chooses to allocate its most precious cognitive resource, sustained visual attention, to fairness. The mechanism driving this preference operates simultaneously on psychological and neurobiological levels, and neither makes sense without the other. Begin with the psychological architecture. The foundational research by Sloan, Baillargeon, and Premack demonstrated that infants as young as 15 months possess a sophisticated, abstract expectation of resource equity that goes far beyond simple matching. When an experimenter distributed resources equally or unequally, the infants reliably demonstrated a violation of expectation response to the unequal distribution. Provided the recipients had exerted equal effort to obtain the resources. If one recipient did all the work, the infants did not expect them to receive equal reward. The baby is not just counting crackers visually. The baby is computing merit, effort, and distributional justice in real time, factoring in the behavioral context of the distribution. And the preference extends from passive looking time to active behavioral selection. Third-party evaluation studies designed to strip away self-interest show that when infants are given the choice to interact with a puppet who distributed toys equally versus one who distributed them unequally, the infants overwhelmingly choose to reach for the fair distributor. Critically, these are third-party observations. The baby received nothing in either scenario. The baby's preference is not driven by self-interest, resource guarding, or a desire for more crackers. It is an abstract, conceptually pure evaluation of fairness as an organizing principle of social behavior. The scale evaluating these interactions is pre-installed. Now shift to the neuroscientific lens to see where that scale physically resides. The brain structure mediating these equity evaluations is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region heavily involved in assigning subjective value and processing complex social rewards. Functional neuroimaging in adults shows that the ventromedial prefrontal cortex tracks both self-reward and the objective equality of distribution between others, firing specifically when equity is achieved. In the infant brain, That this region is rapidly developing its structural connectivity with the amygdala and the anterior insula, the seat of interoceptive and empathetic processing. The equity preference is not a learned cultural norm layered onto a blank slate. It is the direct output of a specific neurobiological circuit designed to map social value and predict group cohesion. From an evolutionary perspective, the presence of this highly specialized circuit in pre-verbal infants points to the intense, ruthless selection's pressure for cooperative behavior in early hominids. In a highly interdependent social species, the ability to rapidly identify fair partners and avoid inequitable ones was a matter of physical survival. And the baby who could detect a cheat before language developed had a distinct evolutionary advantage because they would ally with reliable cooperators. The fairness scale was installed at the factory, hardwired into the cortex, because building a human without a fairness scale was an evolutionary dead end in a species that requires profound cooperation to survive. The philosophical implications of this data extend far beyond the developmental psychology lab, fundamentally disrupting centuries of academic assumptions about human nature. The dominant cultural narrative about human morality, tracing back to philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and heavily reinforced by 20th century behaviorist psychology, argues that human beings are born entirely selfish, driven exclusively by self-interest and physical gratification, and must be civilized through rigorous, often punitive socialization. Fairness, in this classical model, is an artificial construct, a set of complex rules imposed by society to prevent us from destroying each other in the pursuit of resources. The infant looking time data shatters this model completely and irrevocably. If a pre-verbal infant who has never read a philosophy book, never attended a morality lecture, never been punished for being selfish, and never participated in a complex resource economy, spontaneously and consistently allocates its attention to fair outcomes over surprising ones, then the human sense of justice is not a social construction. It is a biological inheritance. The deep desire for objective equity is as native to the human cognitive architecture as the desire for physical safety, the need for attachment, or the drive to acquire language. When the baby stares at the equal distribution on the screen, the baby is not performing a normative judgment learned from its parents or its culture. The baby is generating a purely descriptive output based on its own neurobiological hardware. The scale is real, it is physical, it is functional, and it is actively measuring the world before the baby can even speak the word fair. Watch closely what happens to this pristine, factory-installed evaluation metric as the child moves through early development and begins to encounter the actual, highly stratified structure of human society. The infant with the perfectly calibrated equity detector grows into a toddler who begins to notice that the rules of fairness apply differently in different contexts and to different people. They grow into an older child who enters an educational system where resources are obviously stratified by neighborhood, a social system where some children have profound, unexplained abundance and others have functionally none, an economic reality where deep inequity is not a temporary anomaly to be fixed, but the permanent organizing principle of the community. With every daily exposure to normalized inequality, the internal scale receives conflicting data. The visceral neurobiological response, screaming that something is objectively wrong and inequitable, is continuously met with adult narratives specifically designed to justify and maintain the imbalance. That is just how things work here. Life is not fair. You have to get used to it. Some people earn more because they work harder. Some people just naturally deserve more. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex continues to detect the empirical equity violation, but the cognitive control networks of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex slowly learn to suppress the physiological alarm. The scale is not uninstalled from the brain. The scale is buried under layers of justification. The alarm is muffled by years of cultural conditioning that actively trains the developing brain to ignore its own baseline moral readings. This developmental trajectory raises a profoundly uncomfortable question for any adult actively defending the status quo. When you casually explain to a child that life is simply unfair and they need to accept it, are you stating an objective fact about the universe? Or are you defending a learned deviation from your own original moral hardware? Think about the last time you witnessed a clear instance of inequity. Not a complex political debate, but a raw, immediate moment of unfair distribution or unjustified advantage. Remember the physical sensation that accompanied it, the tightening in your chest, the sudden flush of heat, the visceral, almost physiological discomfort that precedes any conscious intellectual analysis of the situation. That sensation is not a product of your political socialization or your educational background. That is the original infant equity architecture, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and the anterior insula, still running its ancient algorithm, still detecting the imbalance, still sounding the alarm. You did not learn that feeling, you were born with it. And every rationalization you construct to ignore that feeling is a learned behavior suppressing an innate biological truth. What is the one specific type of unfairness that still triggers that visceral, physical alarm in your body? No matter how much you try to rationalize it, tell me in the comments. Because that trigger is the ghost of your original neurobiology trying to get your attention. The behavioral implications for raising children require a complete reversal of the traditional, discipline-focused approach to moral education. The conventional parenting wisdom assumes that adults must painstakingly install the concept of fairness into a reluctant, inherently selfish child, using a combination of reward, punishment, and constant verbal correction to build a moral framework completely from scratch. The developmental neuroscience says that framework is already there, is fully operational. The scale is already perfectly calibrated to measure equity. The primary developmental task of the parent is not the installation of morality. It is the preservation of the morality that already exists. Every single time a child witnesses an inequitable distribution of resources or attention, and an adult justifies it or intentionally ignores it, the volume on the child's internal equity alarm is turned down a fraction of a decibel. Every time a child bravely points out something that feels unfair and is told to stop complaining, to be quiet, or that life is just like that and they need to toughen up, the functional connection between the equity detection circuit in the prefrontal cortex and the child's behavioral output is systematically weakened. To raise a human being who retains their original, powerful capacity for justice, the parental role must shift entirely from lecturer to validator. When the child notices systemic unfairness, the adult's most important job is to confirm the reading on the child's internal scale. Yes, that is genuinely unfair. Yes, your alarm is working correctly and I hear it too. Yes, the acute discomfort you feel right now is the absolutely correct physiological response to this situation. You do not have to immediately fix every single injustice the child observes, which is impossible anyway, but you absolutely must validate the empirical observation of that injustice. The preservation of the equity circuit requires that the circuit's outputs are acknowledged as real, accurate, and important by the child's primary social environment. And a child whose biological fairness alarms are consistently validated by caregivers grows into an adult who trusts their own moral compass completely. A person who does not need an external authority figure or a set of rules to tell them when a system is corrupt or a distribution is unjust. Send this video to a parent who is exhaustively trying to teach their young child how to be a fair person. They need to know they can stop trying to install the software right now. The software is already running perfectly. They just need to make sure the world does not slowly convince the child to uninstall it. Return to the laboratory and look at the setup one more time. The simple room with no distractions. The baby sitting securely on the caregiver's lap to eliminate stress. The two video displays illuminating the darkened space. On one screen, EDs the crackers are divided equally between the two actors. On the other screen, they are divided unequally, creating an obvious imbalance. The eye tracking camera locks onto the infant's pupils, measuring the microsaccades, tracking the allocation of visual attention millisecond by millisecond with mathematical precision. The baby looks at the unequal distribution first. The brain processes the novelty of the unexpected event. The visual cortex registers the violation of expectation. The attentional system prepares to lock on, driven by millions of years of evolutionary mandate to study the unexpected until it becomes predictable. And then, an entirely different circuit fires. The evaluative network in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex assesses the distribution, detects the profound inequity, and overrides the novelty bias completely. The baby physically turns its head. The baby looks at the fair distribution and holds its gaze there. The simplicity of the moment is devastating to watch. No philosophy was required to achieve this preference. No moral instruction had been delivered by a parent or a teacher. No cultural narrative about justice had yet been linguistically absorbed by the child. Just a brain in the first stages of development, a pre-installed scale, and an innate structural preference for equity so unimaginably powerful that it overrides the single most fundamental learning algorithm the human mind possesses. The uncomfortable truth revealed by this data is not that babies prefer fairness, though that is remarkable in itself. The uncomfortable truth is that you did too, long before the world taught you how to tolerate the alternative. And as somewhere between that laboratory setup and the complex life you are living right now, something convinced you to stop looking at the fair outcome and accept the unequal one as normal, as inevitable, as just the way things are. Your brain was built from the very beginning for justice. It had to be systematically trained over years of exposure to normalized inequity for apathy. Subscribe if this changed how you view the origins of human morality. The next video examines what happens in the infant brain when a primary caregiver stops imitating the baby's facial expressions, and the neurological collapse that follows happens faster than anyone thought possible.